coming to you from the shores of gorgeous Lake Michigan. This is home to passionate book lovers. Hosting more than 270 acclaimed authors in 14 years, including best-selling novelists Geraldine Brooks, Ann Patchett, and Mitch Albom. We are live at the historic City Opera House in downtown Traverse City, Michigan. Welcome to the National Writers Series. Tonight, a conversation with best-selling author Ethan Kross, featuring his book Chatter, with guest host Dana Black, a professional MC, podcaster, and speaking coach. The National Writers Series couldn't do this without our amazing audience, dedicated volunteers, and talented authors.
I love NWS!
We're also raising writers with Battle of the Books and free writing classes to 3rd through 12th grade students across the region.
Thank you, NWS!
A special thanks to our media partners, Interlochen Public Radio and the Traverse City Record Eagle. We'd also like to thank our other sponsors, including the Green Brick Foundation, Northgard Technology, Golden Fowler Furnishings, West Shore Bank, Ward and Mary Bevins Gillette, Cordia, and the Cherry Capital Airport. And now, introductions for tonight's event.
We'll figure the cues out eventually. We'll get out here.
Hello, welcome.
Lisa and I considered, it's a couple weeks after Halloween, maybe we'd come out looking like Doug and Ann.
Yeah, with Clark's height and athletic build, like Ann, right?
And the tresses.
Like Doug.
The Doug flow.
Yeah, I got Doug's hair, so that's why we thought we could get away with it. But instead, we're coming out here as National Writers Series board members. I am a proud member of the National Writers Series board, and I'm also a co-founder of Full Tilt Comedy.
I'm Clark Bunting. I'm the board president, a former Discovery Channel executive, and I think I just cratered my comedy, career. So that's over.
Before we introduce tonight's event, we have a special treat for you. National Writers Series Education Director Audrey Fierberg is going to introduce a student reader.
Hi everyone, I'm Audrey Fierberg and I'm the Education Director for the National Writers Series, and it's my pleasure to introduce Devin to you tonight, who took our college admissions essay writing class, which we offer for free for local students, which levels the playing field of the college admissions process. And I found out just before this that Devin has already heard back from 3 schools and they have all said yes so far. So here's Devin's admissions essay.
Everyone in my family's lives changed when my cousin was born. He became the center of my mother and aunt's world, requiring extreme medical attention. Andrew required care at the University of California, San Francisco for 2 months, his survival in question the entire time. My mother flew across the country to help my aunt persevere. I wasn't born yet, but I grew up hearing stories of how my mother took care of her sister during this incredibly intense time. When I was little, I remember noticing that ordinary tasks were difficult for Andrew. His condition, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, affected him not only physically, but also mentally. The combination of his diagnosis and the physical effects of long hospital stays made many of life's most ordinary occurrences an obstacle. Even something as simple as eating was a challenge, and playing hockey, a pastime his family loved, was completely out of reach. But when the Chicago Blackhawks were on, Andrew always cheered the loudest. He was the biggest hockey fan I've ever known. My childhood memories of him sound like those cheers and smell like the unhealthily delicious junk food we ate while watching hockey in the basement. His determination to still be involved with the sport he loved so dearly led him to be the team manager for his high school. Andrew reminded us that life is more than what we can do physically. His grit and persistence are something that I will always admire. Andrew passed away suddenly at the age of 17. He caught influenza, and with his compromised lungs, it was too much for his body to handle. He ended up on ECMO, which is a form of life support. When he finally improved enough to be taken off, he had a stroke that destroyed over half his brain. They came to the decision to take him off of any form of life support. My family gathered around his hospital bed, and he passed away in minutes. At Andrew's funeral, the church was overflowing with his former classmates, teachers, friends, and family. I remember looking behind me and seeing his entire hockey team sobbing. My cousin Eric went up to announce to the crowd, "We are burying Andrew with his skates on." His death left each of us devastated, but his life nonetheless helped me discover my passion: assisting children like him. Children left struggling in a world not designed for them. Although I was grieving, I also felt inspired. I jumped at the opportunity to join my school's peer-to-peer program. Peer-to-peer is a mentoring arrangement between general education students and special education students. We engage in activities such as art and sports. Peer-to-peer has been such an important part of my high school experience. I've learned how to make connections without words, something I never thought was possible. I've learned how to form friendships across differences. This program was my way of honoring Andrew. I could channel my morning into something positive, helping kids like him feel included in our school community. In peer-to-peer, I've made connections that I will always cherish. Our bond is different from any friendship I've ever experienced. When my peer sees me in the hallways, she points me out, runs up, and hugs me. This floods my heart with joy. I know that our friendship means a lot to her, and she truly cares about me. The feeling I get when I make a difference in her life is amazing, and I want to continue this path and help people who are different to feel included in our community.
That was just a remarkable essay. Thank you, Devin.
Yeah, thank you, Devin. We are delighted you've joined the National Writers Series tonight, a year-round book festival. Tonight's event is supported by Herm Triezenberg and Elizabeth Mostrom, Health and Wellness Author Conversations. Thank you, Herm and Elizabeth, for your support. Yes. And we're proud to share that nearly 300 of us are watching from the City Opera House and around the country on our live stream. Welcome.
In a moment, we'll hear from Ethan Kross talk about his national bestseller, Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. It talks about how to use the power of our inner voice to combat anxiety, improve health, and deepen our relationships.
That's right. Ethan Kross is one of the world's leading experts on emotional regulation. He's an award-winning professor at University of Michigan's Psychology Department and its Ross School of Business, where he's the director of the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. Ethan has participated in policy discussions at the White House and has been interviewed about his research on CBS Evening News and Good Morning America, to name a few. His research has been featured in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and more. His education isn't too shabby either. He got his BA at the University of Pennsylvania and his PhD at Columbia University. He also has a new book coming out called Shift that he'll also discuss tonight.
Our guest host for this evening's conversation is Dana Black. She's a professional union actor. I think you saw that in the intro video. She's also an executive public speaking coach. I could use the help. A moderator, a storyteller, an MC, and the host and creator of I Swear on My Mother's Grave podcast. And for the last 3 years, Dana has been a speaker delivery coach for TEDx in Chicago. She moved to Traverse City about 2 years ago from Chicago and is already active in Big Brother, Big Sister, a board member of the City Opera House, and works with several other nonprofits. And she loves to kayak. I was thinking maybe we should have connected her with Peter Heller.
Yeah, Peter Heller. Before we bring Ethan and Dana on stage, we'd like to acknowledge that tonight's event is taking place on lands cherished and maintained for generations by the Indigenous people of this area. We wish to recognize the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians and their land, which we are gathered upon today. Thank you.
And now, let's please welcome Dana and Ethan to the stage.
Hey.
How are you? How's your chatter?
Oh, we're going to get to it. You know there's a lot of chatter. I just learned that Ethan loves baths as much as I love taking a bath.
That was meant to be confidential. She promised me she wasn't going to tell you that.
I was like, dude, tell me. I love baths, and what a great way to relax.
Well, let's ask the audience. Anyone else here like baths?
Yeah.
So we are with our people.
We are with our people. We found our people.
Yeah.
Ethan, you came from Ann Arbor. You said it's already snowing. How was the commute? Thanks for coming to Traverse.
It is a delight to be here. I thought I would see more snow here, but it was gray in Ann Arbor when I woke up and covered in white stuff, which was actually really exciting because it's been summer for the last 3 weeks down there.
Right.
But I came to blue skies and smiling faces, and so this is just a real treat. So thanks everyone for coming out to just hear about Chatter and Shift, and I can't wait to get into it with all of you.
Yeah. Before we get into this incredible book, this insightful, beautiful, accessible book about the voices in our heads, why they matter, how to harness them, we could all use it. I wanted to start by reading 2 quotes from the beginning of your book, okay?
Please.
The first quote is by former President Barack Obama. It says, "The biggest challenge, I think, is always maintaining your moral compass. Those are the conversations I'm having internally. I'm measuring my actions against that inner voice that, for me at least, is audible, is active. It tells me where I think I'm on track and where I think I'm off track." Thank you, Barack. The second quote is from former ABC journalist Dan Harris, the podcaster of 10% Happier. And the quote is, "The voice in my head is an asshole." So I can relate to that. And I thought I would look at you and think we can all think of our asshole thoughts in our heads.
Well, you know what? I would love to do a pulse check with the audience right now. So when you think about the voices inside your head, whatever you understand that concept to refer to right now, we'll give you a definition a little bit. How many of you sometimes think that it's a nag, a nuisance, or even sometimes, dare I say, an asshole, by show of hands? So Dana, we have avid bathers and an audience with a ton of asshole voices.
Right.
Like, this is just an author's delight.
This is a dream.
This cannot get any better.
Assholes in the head.
That's
inside
right.
the bath.
Oh my god! Well, no, that is an oxymoron.
That's not it?
No, it's not possible. And in fact, the heat silences the asshole. Don't quote me on that or look up the reference because that study has not yet been done. But I may go back and tell my students to do it now.
The steam.
It just eradicates it. Yes, science-based truth. Not. Yes.
But what is going through, like, right now, today? What's been going through your head?
Well, I'll tell you what was going through my head as I heard you read those quotes. I'm going to record the audiobook for Shift next Monday, and I thought, my God, why am I recording that book? You should record it because you read that. You read those quotes in such an animated way.
Yeah.
So what's going through my head? Lots of stuff. We experience lots of thoughts, of verbal thoughts throughout the day. Since I touched down, it's really been just excitement to be here. And there's nothing more enjoyable for me as an author to be able to share years of writing and, in my case, 2.5 decades of research that I think has the potential to help people with actual live human beings. Chatter was published in 2021, right around the time, like just after COVID hit. So, so didn't really have a chance to do a lot of this. So that was really exciting to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, and before we get to Chatter and the tools that can help us harness these voices in our heads, I wanted you to help us understand why we talk to ourselves. And we all have an inner voice, right? We all have a voice inside our head that can come in many shapes and forms. You talk in this beautiful book about people who stutter. They report sounding more fluent in their minds. That people who sign, who are deaf, that they have sign language, they were talking to themselves as well, they have a new inner language, and that this voice can be our greatest coach, and then can become our harshest critic, which makes you want to, like it can't, right? Like it can make us sick, it could affect our lives, it can affect our jobs, our relationships, it could affect us at the bath. Tell us.
No.
Okay.
Besides that.
The science. Tell us tell us what the inner voice is. Okay. Why we talk to ourselves. Tell us.
Okay, let's do the 2-minute crash course, Inner Voice 101. Are you guys ready? Okay, so definition. When scientists use the term inner voice, what we're talking about is our ability to silently use language in our heads. And it turns out that is a remarkable tool of the human mind. I often refer to it as a Swiss Army knife. Does everyone here know what a Swiss Army knife is? Yeah, you may think, why is this professor asking me this stupid question? Well, I'll tell you why. Because I also often teach to undergraduates. And when I ask them, hey, does anyone know what a Swiss Army knife is? Blank stares. No one knows what it is. I have no idea why this is. Maybe it was 9/11, no more weapons.
Maybe.
In any case. Inner voice, Swiss Army knife of the mind, lets us do a lot of different things. It's a multi-purpose tool, and I'll just quickly shoot off 4 things it helps you do. One thing your inner voice lets you do, keep information active in your head. I'm going to give you all a phrase right now, and what I want you to do is silently repeat that phrase 3 times in your head. You ready? Are you ready? You have to realize we are blind up here. We have these enormous lights shining in our faces. We cannot read any facial expressions.
You're making them work.
Interactive is good. Go blue. Is anyone here not able to do that? Raise your hand. Okay, we have escorts. We should excuse these people from the conversation. Okay, I have a fix for you. So you can preface that statement with an expletive of your choice. Now can everyone do it? Thank you. So inner voice, it's part of what we call our verbal working memory system, fundamental system of the human mind that lets you do something that is totally ordinary, but also extraordinary. Your verbal working memory system, it lets you keep verbal information active in your head for short periods of time. So if you go to the grocery store, like me, your partner tells you what to buy, and you show up, and you think to yourself, shit, what was I supposed to get? And then you repeat that list in your head, milk, cheese, cookies. That's your verbal working memory system. That's one thing your inner voice lets you do. Another thing, let me ask you, before you have an important presentation to deliver, or if you're going to have a difficult conversation with a client, you coach lots of people, do you ever go over what you're going to say before those events in your head?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's function number 2, right? We use our inner voice to simulate and plan. Before I have a presentation, I often go over what I'm going to say. That helps me prepare for important events. Third thing, do you like to exercise? Or do you exercise? Like, doesn't really matter.
Yeah, like is different. Do I? Yes.
Do you ever talk to yourself when you exercise?
Oh, honey, yeah.
So what do you say to yourself when you exercise? I always love to ask people this question.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the self-coaching, self-talk as well. But yes, I say I'm proud of you. You're doing good.
I want to stop.
The Y closes at 5. Get out of there quick, right?
So I just want to pause there for a second. Did you hear? This is very strange. You're not just talking to yourself, but you're talking to yourself like you're referring to someone else.
Yeah.
You're going to be fine. So, we'll talk about why you do that later. So you're talking to yourself throughout that exercise match. Anyone here talk to themselves when they exercise?
Or I'm like, I shouldn't have had that bagel. There's lots of thoughts coming.
Or I really want that donut.
Right.
Or for me, I do a lot of group exercise classes where these instructors, they look so kind, but they tell you to do these exceptionally painful things.
They seem so innocent.
And if you deviate from the protocol, they shame you. It's really not. I should stop going to this place as I describe this to you. In any case, they tell me what to do. And in my head, I'm from Brooklyn. In Brooklyn, in case you probably all know this, expletives are very popular in the way people speak. In my head, it's like, why don't you bleep and do this?
Right.
And so that can be motivating too. So we motivate ourselves with our inner voice. Athletes who are skilled at harnessing this voice to be motivating and encouraging, they outperform those athletes who do not recruit their inner voice. Last function of the inner voice that I'll flag is, it's to me the most magical feature. And I'm a scientist. I use the word magical not in a supernatural sense, but an awe-inspiring sense. Like, my God, I'm so grateful and privileged really to study this beautiful thing called the human mind, the brain. We use our inner voice to make sense of this messy world in which we live. So when we experience adversity, we often stop and we try to make sense of what's happening. What does this mean about me, about society? And we use our inner voice to author those stories that give shape and texture to our understanding of who we are. So if we just pause for a second and just review, this is a tool that you use to remember your grocery list so your partner doesn't get mad at you. We use it to simulate and plan. We use it to control and motivate ourselves. We use it to make meaning out of our lives. These are some of the most important things that we do on a daily basis. And your inner voice is pivotal to all of those things. And yet, how many people here, by a show of hands, had a class on their inner voice growing up? I think this is a problem. And it's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. And shamefully, it's actually a problem that I was not clued into until I was teaching a class at Michigan to graduating seniors. And the final assignment on the last day to the students was, hey, bring any questions you have for me. This was a class on the science of self-control, science's greatest hits when it comes to managing your mind and your emotions, including your inner voice. And a student named Ariel asked me on the final day, why did anyone teach us about this earlier? Why are you teaching us about this now? We're done. And my response to her, the cheeky response, number one, just to bide some time, was, well, fear not. You are going to have opportunities once you graduate to still manage your inner voice. But I didn't have a really good answer. And the book Chatter and Shift, which is, we'll talk about it later, a broader exposition of managing our emotions, were intended to do that, to share this knowledge with everyone.
Yeah. And you said that people will say, I don't want my voice. I don't want it. Silence it. Get rid of it. Take it out. Quiet it. And you said in the book, I think that's a horrible mistake.
Terrible. A, because it's not possible. And B, we just talked about, do you want to silence something that is this remarkable tool? There's this wonderfully tragic story that I tell in the book about a woman
it's incredible.
named Jill Bolte Taylor, who was a neuroanatomist at Harvard. She was an absolute rock star in her profession. So she studied the structure of the human brain. And she would travel the world giving lectures. And if you peered into her life from afar, you would think, this person, she just has it all. But inside, internally, like so many of us, she often found herself struggling because her inner voice wasn't always humming along in an optimized form. Sometimes it would morph into chatter. She would go inside to reflect on her problems, but she wouldn't come out of that process with clear solutions. She would just spin. She would turn those problems over and over in her head. And it felt awful. And so she would often ask herself, God, how can I just silence, get rid of this inner voice? Well, she actually stumbled on an inventive solution. One morning, she's exercising on a treadmill before work, and she suffers a massive stroke that is localized in the left hemisphere of her brain. So if you all will do a little brain anatomy here, you ready? So I'm going to put my fingers up to my head in an awkward configuration, and I want you to trace where my fingers are going to intersect. You ready? Thank you. Remember, I'm blind up here. Can't see a thing. Okay, so right in that spot, a blood vessel pops, perfuses that area of her brain with blood, and as a result, she temporarily loses her ability to speak because the blood vessel popped in a part of her brain that was involved in speech production. So this woman not only loses the capacity to speak out loud, but she also loses the capacity to talk to herself. Now that to me is, to use a technical term, a mind blower. I live in a world of words, as so many of us do. I'm constantly talking to myself.
All the time.
All the time. And so I can't really, it's hard for me to simulate what would it be like to not be able to use words, to repeat the grocery list or curse out the exercise instructor or prepare for a speech. Like,
tell yourself you're doing good.
Or tell myself I got this and it's going to be great. She tells us what it was like. Initially, she describes the experience as euphoric. She actually, there's a quote she uses that I'll never forget. She described herself as going to La La Land. And she goes on to describe, it was inconvenient to not be able to talk, but guess what? Once the language went away, so did all of the worries and ruminations that kept her up at night and that really undermined the quality of her daily experiences. Now, she does go on to say that as time went on, she found it just a bit of an inconvenience to not be able to use words in her life. She ultimately did regain her linguistic faculties, and she wrote a memoir about this experience. So she's now more of an advocate of less invasive interventions to heal chatter. But I love to share her story because I think it really speaks to this point you're raising, that we're so often told, just silence that inner voice. That's the absolute wrong goal we want to give people. The goal we want to give people is to harness the inner voice. And the good news is there are lots of non-invasive, science-based tools that researchers like myself have spent decades trying to identify that can help people do precisely that. To just use one analogy here, a hammer is a tool that we use to create wonderful things. This building, this glorious building, was built in part with a hammer. That's a hammer in the right hands. A hammer in the wrong hands, a hammer used the wrong way, can be a murder weapon or a source of massive destruction. That's me, not murder, but massive destruction. So what we need to do is learn, how do we wield our inner voice or our emotions more generally, more skillfully? And science provides us with a guide, but we need to get that guide to folks. And that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about doing.
Yeah. I love that you shared that story. It's an incredible story in the book. We're going to just talk for a little bit about your childhood. Now, we're going to talk about your dad for a beat. And you're pretty honest that you talk a lot about him telling you to go inside, to ask yourself the question when you were young. And you said, a lot of times I didn't know what the question was. I'm a child. But he was teaching me mindfully about introspection. And we talked a little bit in the green room. I was like, how did that feel for 3-year-old little Ethan to be told, go inside?
And you were so kind. Dana asked permission to ask me to talk about my dad.
I was like, gotcha.
My feeling was, I've been waiting 43 years of my life to finally do this on stage, so let's do it. My dad was this really interesting, colorful character. He's still alive, but I'm talking about him like long ago. I love you, Dad, so don't worry. But Here's the mental image of my dad. He fit the stereotype on the exterior of a gruff Brooklynite. So I'm from Brooklyn. What does a gruff Brooklynite look like? Just imagine big bushy mustache, Yankees cap, aggressive driver on the road with a cigarette dangling from your lips, and extreme preternatural dexterity with the usage of one's middle digit while driving.
Got it.
You got
wow,
it?
that was that. Yeah, got it.
Yeah,
Took me a minute.
Unbelievable flexibility there, to the extreme.
I want that in your third book. Can that get in your third book?
Well, that'll be in the book proposal. Enormously embarrassing in the back seat when that stuff was happening. But so that was one side of him, this larger than life Yankees fan. But when he wasn't doing those kinds of things, he was, without exaggerating one bit, sitting in his bedroom at home in a lotus position, meditating, reading about Eastern philosophy. This was not a college graduate. He just found this fascination with Eastern philosophical ideas. And for some reason, I still can't understand this, he thought his 3-year-old son would find it interesting to hear about what he was reading about. Yeah. And so one of the first lessons I remember him giving me was, hey, little guy, that's what he used to call me, little guy, whenever you have a problem, I want you to go inside and find the kernel. Like the kernel. I watched G.I. Joe at the time. Like what are we talking about here?
Popcorn?
The kernel of truth. Very dramatic here. Go inside, find that kernel, get to the bottom of the problem, and move on. And so when this happened, I would roll my eyes, followed by saying, leave me alone, you're so annoying, and I'd run away, often tell my mom he's being annoying. But something really interesting happened. And so I'm guessing we have a lot of parents in the room here. Have your kids ever done this to you, tell you you're really annoying, leave me alone? Okay, now we're all responding. There we go. So my advice to you is, if that's true of your kids and they're still living with you, or your grandkids, keep on doing that annoying stuff. Keep on telling them the things that you think could benefit them, even if they say it's ridiculous, because we know that those messages have a way of penetrating our minds, and they did for me. And so,
right, you went to college, and you this introspection served you until you went.
It served me incredibly well,
right.
And so, I listened to my dad. I was always really good at not getting stuck in those negative thought loops. I never got stuck in that chatter. And then I went to college, took a psychology class, and halfway through the semester, we get to the topic of introspection. Scientific study of turning inward. First thing I learned in that class, this capacity, this is one of our greatest gifts of our species. Our ability to turn inward and use language to reflect, this is what allows us to solve problems, build spaceships, develop vaccines in record time. But what I also learned in that class was this very same tool is also the source of enormous human suffering. Because we often go inside to find solutions to our problems and we get stuck. We ruminate, we worry, we berate ourselves incessantly. And once I discovered that paradox, it was like a light was switched in my head, and that was it. I wanted to go to graduate school to learn how to use the tools of science to figure out why this happens, and most importantly, to figure out what can we do to actually help people when they find themselves stumbling. And so that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's chatter.
That's chatter.
Yeah. Will you say it again, what chatter is? And then, first, but were there moments where introspection didn't work for you? Like you were finding yourself in college. I mean, in college, a lot of things weren't working for me. But right, like you were going in, and I'm wondering if when that stopped maybe working for you, it wasn't just an aha moment of I want to study this. Tell me if any of this rings true.
No, I don't experience chatter. I use the tools. Of course I experience chatter.
I mean back then.
Well, even now. No, people ask this a lot. Like, hey, Dr. Kross, you wrote this book on these tools. You ever experience chatter?
Like, of course.
Duh. I'm a human being.
Yeah.
We all do. Here's what I'm really good at, and have been since I started learning about these tools. I'm really good at identifying the chatter the moment it begins to percolate. And once it does, I immediately have tools that I can reach for that often nip it in the bud, shorten the amount of time that I spend in that state. And that's a critically important attribute,
right,
because the longer you stay in chatter, the more harmful it can be. But in college, did I ever experience chatter? Hell yeah, I mean, like there were I got rejected a lot by girls.
Oh.
Yeah. I kept on just doing it. It was glutton for punishment, but that could be a source of chatter.
But tell us the definition of chatter again so we can hear it.
So the simple definition of chatter is getting stuck in a negative thought loop. So you've got a problem, you're trying to work through it, but you just keep turning it over and over in your mind in ways that keep that problem active. We're remarkably skilled at doing that. You ever notice that when there's something you're worried about, this brain of yours is this unbelievable hypothesis-generating machine. Like you can come up with infinite numbers of ways that your life is going to end, right?
Yes.
Like seemingly in horrific ways.
Yes.
It often, and it works on overdrive at 2 a.m., right? Like middle of the night, it's even worse. So chatter is getting stuck in those negative thought loops. If it's a thought loop about the past, sometimes we call that rumination or perseveration. If it's about the future, we sometimes call that worry. Chatter is this umbrella term that just captures this process of spinning. And I do genuinely believe it is one of the big problems we face as a species. It makes it hard for us to think and perform. It creates friction in our relationships with other people, and it undermines not only our subjective well-being, how good we feel in the moment, but it also has negative implications for our physical health. So it's something I think we need to talk a lot more about and give people tools to manage.
Yes. Tools to manage, which your book does so beautifully. I wanted to talk about when you were on Anderson Cooper's Full Circle a couple years ago. And Anderson loved this book. He loved chatter. And he wanted to talk about it. And he was like, this book was written for me, right? He's like, I'm struggling with some issues. And I'm doing a lot of these tools in this book. And he said, I'm always in my head, but I'm trying. And one of my favorite is finding, broadening my perspective. And he said, so when I'm stressed at work, the way I can get out of that chatter in my brain is I tell myself, well, hey, I didn't kill anybody. And that's something I have also done, right? I'll be like, well, I don't know how Google spreadsheets works, but hey, I didn't kill anybody. You know what I mean? And the chatter quiets, right? And we can broaden our perspective. And that was one strategy that he talked about. And I know that you also love a strategy in here that I love and I use as a public speaking coach, which we talked about a little, is this distance self-talk. And coaching ourselves in the third person, coaching ourselves like we're a friend, because we can help somebody else more than we can help ourselves. We can talk to somebody else kinder. So talk about that, because you also say the importance of distance self-talk is doing it internally and not out loud. And I'm an actor and I'm constantly talking out loud. And I'm okay with that. But it can look weird, right? If we're telling somebody, coach yourself by saying, Dana, you've got this. Dana, you're capable. And you're walking around the street saying it. So talk to me about saying it internally and a little bit about distance self-talk and how it is one of your favorite tools as well.
So distance self-talk is a tool that involves trying to work through a problem silently, using your name and you. All right, Ethan.
Second person, right?
Ethan, you got this. You're going to have a great conversation with Dana. You've done this before. It's going to go great. Not saying that out loud in front of 300 people. Now, the reason I advocate not using this tool out loud is because it powerfully violates social norms. So there's nothing actually harmful about talking out loud to yourself. I encourage you to do it in the confines of your own home while taking a bath.
Right,
Ethan.
right. I'm on a hike. Yeah.
On a hike. It depends on...
that can be weird too.
It depends on how secluded the hike is. But we're just not used to people talking to themselves out loud. We have stereotypes about folks who do that. And so to avoid those kinds of social stigma, the safer route is to do it silently. one of the reasons why it's my favorite tool is because it is a remarkably easy tool to use. You can use it on the fly. Some of the tools I talk about in Chatter and Shift, there's a lot of science behind them, but they're effortful. They take time and energy to use. A great example of this would be expressive writing. So sitting down and writing about your deepest thoughts and feelings surrounding an experience you're having chatter about for 15 to 20 minutes, just letting yourself go for 1 to 3 days, that can be really, really helpful for helping people manage chatter. But you've got to find the 15 or 20 minutes to do it. Sometimes we have that time. If you do, great, use it. But if you're experiencing chatter while you're being introduced on stage, you can't whip out the paper and pencil or notes app on your iPhone, right? They took my phone away before I even came up here. So you've got to have other tools. Distant self-talk is something you can use on the fly. Many people do this spontaneously. Does anyone here ever find themselves using you to refer to them? Like, you got this? Yeah. So that has a name, distant self-talk. And here's why it works. I think this is really important because once we understand why things work, it makes it easier to motivate ourselves to use it. It's a phenomenon you just touched on called Solomon's paradox, named after the Bible's King Solomon. When you hear about good old King Solomon, what comes to mind? What was he known for worldwide? For being wise. Wisest guy in history. It's a pretty good reputation, right? With a caveat, he was really wise when it came to other people's problems. When it came to his own life, if you dig into his history, as many scientists and historians have, he made a slew of terrible decisions. This is a truism of our species. We are much wiser, we are much better at giving advice to other people than we are giving advice to ourselves. So that's right, you are all giant hypocrites. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's called being human. If we had more time, we'd get into why that is. But that's how it works. So yes, keep telling your kids to do things that you yourself don't do. It's well-intentioned. Here's what distant self-talk does. It plays on this mechanism. When we use the word you to refer to ourselves, the word you is a term that we typically use when we refer to other people. Mm-hmm. So that's a way of automatically switching your perspective. It's putting you into this advice-giving mode. That makes it much easier for us to work through our problems effectively.
Yeah, totally. And yet, you say, right, where it's easier to give advice to other people, but then you talk about this problem of sometimes we go to other people, and they're the peril of our lives. We think, well, I'm going to talk to this friend, we're going to ruminate, and they're going to help, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, that guy's a jerk, and then we're just going to spin and spin. But that friend or that family member isn't helping me gain perspective.
I'm sensing some projection here.
What?
Some projection.
Where's my husband? No, he's over there. And I love to give advice sometimes, unsolicited. Love doing that as well. And so there's a problem of when let's say we're struggling with grief, right? We want to go to people, we don't want to be alone, and yet being with other people can make us feel lonelier. Or we think, I need this support, but they're not able to actually support me, and it's making me sicker and worse, and they're not giving me perspective, they're not helping. So you know where we're going with this. How do we find this incredible board of chatter advisors, and how do we help our friends be better at supporting us? And also, isn't it like trial and error? Like I go to a friend and I'm like, they didn't help me. I got to go to somebody else. And you talk about finding this beautiful board of people that you go to for different problems.
I've got a wonderful board of chatter advisors, and we could give it to everyone here.
Yes.
So let's do it. Okay.
So tell us how we do this.
So number one, you nailed it, right? Other people can be a remarkable asset or one of our greatest liabilities when it comes to our emotional lives and the chatter that we experience. Let me share a personal story about this, actually. I think about it whenever I talk about this topic.
Are you in the bath during this story?
We're going to keep this PG rated. We don't know who's cluing in here. So several years ago, there was a devastating shooting not far from where I live in Ann Arbor. It was, I believe, in Oakland County, about an hour away from where we live. And in the aftermath of that horrific event, there was some talk about copycat attacks and threats to other schools. And my wife and I found ourselves in the difficult position of having to decide whether we should send our older kid to school. This wasn't, by the way, because we didn't give a crap about our younger kid. She wasn't at school at the time. Little levity up on an otherwise serious topic. But this was a pretty difficult decision to make, and the chatter wheels were beginning to churn. We ultimately decided to send her to school the next day. And I have a flashbulb memory of what happened the next day. A flashbulb memory is where you can actually see the scene in your mind of the recollection. I'm sitting at my office desk, and there's a bank of windows behind the computer, and I see around 3:30 the carpool car begins to come down the driveway, and I'm instantly awash with relief because I know what that means.
Yeah.
My daughter's safe.
Yeah.
But she gets out of the car, and I see on her face she is visibly distressed. And so when that happens, when I encode that emotional experience, the sport jacket goes off, the glasses go flying, caveman protective dad mode comes out. What happened? Did something happen at school today? Tell me. And she goes on to say, Daddy, I realized that what happened the other day was really bad, but I don't want to keep talking about it over and over again. And in every class I had, the teachers kept on asking me to share my feelings. I don't want to do that because it doesn't make me feel good. So what happened in my daughter's class that day happens in schools, families, organizations around the country and world. There's a very strong belief, this cultural intuition, that the way to work through chatter is to just get it out, vent your emotions to someone else. And there's been a lot of research on the emotional consequences of this. And what we've learned is venting doesn't help us work through our chatter. I want to repeat that again because it's a really important take home.
Yeah, repeat it.
Venting does not help us work through our chatter. Venting can be helpful for strengthening the friendship and relational bonds between people. If I'm struggling, I come to you with a problem and you're willing to take the time to empathize with me, to listen, to validate what I'm going through, that's really good for our relationship. I feel like you've got my back. But if all we do in a conversation is go back and forth about the misery of what I'm going through or the anger and despair, I leave that conversation. I feel really good about our relationship, but all I've done is just go over the negative parts of that experience. So I leave the conversation just as upset, if not more upset than when I started. There's a name for this. It's often called co-rumination. We're ruminating together. So if venting isn't the answer, what is? The formula for getting good chatter support or providing it, there are 2 steps. Step 1, if I'm the one seeking support, it is important that I go to someone who does take some time initially to listen and learn. They need to know what I'm going through. Establishing those empathic connections is really, really good for relationships. But once those bonds are formed, once the person learns about my experience, they ideally start to work with me to broaden my perspective, right? To help me work through that experience. Other people are often in a unique position to do that because a problem isn't happening to them. So that is the formula. You first want to listen, connect, and then when you see your opening, you want to start working through the person to broaden. Now, there's an art to doing this well, and as a scientist, I wish I could tell everyone here, you should listen for 1 minute and 37 seconds, and then transition to broadening perspective.
Right. I was like, how do I tell a friend, okay, here's what's going to happen at this brunch for the first minute?
That's right. That's right. So there's an art to this. So let's say my wife comes to me with some chatter. Laura, I'm sorry, I love you, but I'm going to talk to you about as an example. She's watching right now. If Laura comes to me about a problem, hey, can I talk to you about something? Of course. What's up? Like, tell me. She starts sharing the problem. I'm listening. I'm being attentive. It sounds awful. I can't believe they said that. And then once I get the sense that she's gotten a little bit of it out and she's maybe ready to have her perspective be broadened, if I'm not sure, I'll ask. Totally get it. I have a thought. Can I share with you? I will admit, sometimes I might as well flip a coin. Because sometimes it's, no, I'm not done. Just keep listening. And then I just keep listening, and I try again a little bit later. At other points, it's, yes, please, what do you think? Why? And then I'll get in there, and I'll try to broaden her perspective. Well, you've been through this kind of stuff before. How did you deal with it last time? Or what would you tell me if I was in this position? Or, well, I've been in this situation. Here's what I've done. So there are lots of ways you can broaden that perspective. But the key is to do both of these things. First, listen and learn, and then advise in that order, but be flexible about when you transition. So, just to round this off, the invitation I would love to extend to all of you here is to think really carefully about who in your life, who do you go to talk about your problems? You can actually write their names down on a list, right? For different kinds of chatter, personal chatter, work chatter, list all the names of the people you go to, and then think to yourself, case by case, do they do both of these things for me? If they do, circle their names. If they don't, take out that giant red Sharpie and cross them off the list. And there's some satisfaction you may derive in doing it. Lean into that. It feels good. You have two choices for those names that you've crossed off. Number one, don't talk to them about your chatter. There are people in my life who I love dearly. DNA determines those affiliative connections, if you get what I mean. I never talk to them about my chatter because I know that they want to help, but they're just going to light me up further. So I just don't go there. We talk about other things. But then there are for other people who you think have some hope of being resuscitated, you can try to help them. And there are ways of doing that too skillfully. I would not recommend, for example, taking a friend out to lunch who just gets you to ruminate with you. And I would not say, hey, Dana, I just went to this presentation, and you know what I learned? You suck as a chatter advisor. You're awful. You do the exact worst thing. Not a skillful intervention. Yeah. A better intervention. I was just reading this book, and did you know that venting can actually backfire?
Yes.
I had no idea.
Invisible support, which I do with my husband sometimes.
Why don't you tell us more about that?
Well, we love him dearly. We love him a lot. But yeah, invisible support. I go to him with a lot of my problems, okay? And he doesn't always, I feel like he wants to handle his on his own. And so if he's struggling with something in the yard, we have moles, we have a grass problem, and I can tell he's stressed, right? And I'm like, I don't know anything about moles or grass either, but he doesn't want advice from me. So if we're near a neighbor or we're out with other people, I'm like, something will come up about the grass or the yard, and it's like having a loud conversation next to him, so he can hear it. And I'm thinking, oh, maybe he's getting some invisible support, but I don't want to ever feel like I want to just tell him I want to solve it for him. And I think he wants to solve things on his own. And again, I love him so much, and everything's going great. And he cooks all the food in the house. So yeah, it's all good. We love him. But right, that's tough. It's tough to do invisible support. And that's because we do it because they feel like, right, if they didn't ask for advice, us giving them advice makes them feel like they can't manage a challenge. Talk about that.
Well, I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced this. So think back for the parents in the audience, when you first had your child and you have this, loving thing in front of you and you're trying to change the diapers and you're getting it all wrong, and your parents are hovering and they offer you advice about how to do it and they tell you what to do. Has anyone ever had this experience? Does that feel good? This is not a nice feeling. It's really hard for us to not try to help other people who we care about when we see them struggling. This happens to me with I have two daughters. When I find some rumination, some chatter happening, it's hard for me to resist the temptation to help. I can't help with lots of other things, but chatter, that's my jam. I've made the mistake of volunteering on one family trip. My oldest daughter was ruminating about a boy. I tried to give her some advice. It was not pretty. She was very, very upset. It was one of the most uncomfortable meals with my family I've ever had. This is therapy, but
let it out.
I offered the advice. She told me I was incredibly annoying. I had flashbacks to my dad, very Freudian, and then she elevated the whole situation by telling my wife what I did, and then she got mad. It was terrible. Yeah. I was very lonely dinner. So here's the deal. Here's why this happens. That I made. That's right. So here's why this happens. We all have this drive to have what we call to feel self-efficacious. Psychologists like fancy terms.
Yeah, that sounds...
To feel like we are capable of handling our own shit. That's what that means, right? We want to feel like we have agency. And when you offer advice to someone, when they haven't asked for it, what that gets registered as, you don't think I'm capable of handling my own circumstances.
Yes.
And that elicits defensive, even among people who you care about and love you dearly. So in these circumstances, you see someone suffering, you want to help them, but they haven't asked you for help. Before you take that very courageous step of volunteering unsolicited advice, what the research would suggest you should do is help them invisibly. What invisible support involves is getting people resources they can benefit from, but without shining a spotlight on the fact that you are doing that. And there are multiple ways you could do this. I'll give you a couple examples. Let's say my wife is chatter city, it's a busy day, work, kids, all this stuff. And let's say it was her turn to pick up the groceries. I'll just volunteer to do that, right? I'm gonna, it's convenient for me. Let me pick up the groceries today. I'll take care of dinner. I'm not doing that and then over dinner that night reminding her, hey, did you realize I picked up the groceries today? It wasn't my turn. Like, that's not what this is about. This is a little step to provide what we call instrumental support, to just make her life just a little bit easier. If a group in my lab, if they're under deadline to submit a grant and they're just working around the clock, I know they don't have time to take care of themselves. I just have the pizza delivered, right? I'm not being asked to do that. It's the little things I'm doing to help. Give you another kind of invisible support. Let's say someone on my team is struggling with their public speaking skills, something that you know a lot about. Really important for scientists to be able to communicate what they do to the world if they care about impact. Before I take that person aside and say with compassion, hey, I realize, there are a couple of ways we can level up your game. Here are a couple of things I want you to try. Before I take that step, we'll first have a team meeting in which we each share out best practices. So here, I want everyone to think about two things that have really benefited them when it comes to public speaking. And so we go around the circle, we get that information, we're putting it out there for them to benefit from, but I'm not shining a spotlight, that I'm targeting that information towards the person who's struggling. Last example of invisible support that I'll share with you is one that I'm always a little nervous sharing, but it's a powerful one. It's something that I call affectionate but not creepy touch.
Yes.
You familiar with this?
Yes. Yeah, and you've noticed already, I'm a touchy person as well.
Yeah, you've touched me several times.
I have.
Yes.
I have.
Yeah. It felt okay. I liked it. Well, hubby, no worries. It was all
that's not
above
invisible
the shoulders.
Support.
Don't you worry. Yeah. And Laura, nothing
that's
to be concerned
support.
about.
No, I'm a very touchy. I think, I find a lot of love and support in it eases me.
Well, let's unpack that for a second, because I think this is an overlooked modality for managing our emotions. In fact, in my new book, Shift, I spend a whole chapter talking about sensory shifters, the way that our senses provide us with these unbelievably powerful levers for virtually automatically shifting our emotions around. Touch is the first sense that we develop. We actually develop it while we're gestating in the womb. And it is a powerful mover of our emotions. What is the first thing we do when a baby is born into this world? Shout it out, folks.
hold?
We couldn't understand a thing
them?
you said. That wasn't helpful. We won't do that again. Tell me.
We hold them?
We hold them.
Hey.
Right? Skin to skin contact. I remember distinctly both of my daughters, my wife, it makes sense. She did the hard work in the delivery room. Like, she got all the action first. She's hugging them and they're on the chest. I'm like, when do I get some of that?
Yeah.
Right? I wanted some of that skin to skin contact. We have receptors on our skin that are specifically tuned to encode an affectionate embrace. And when those receptors are triggered, two things happen. Number one, there's this automatic release of stress-fighting, feel-good chemicals in our bodies. Number two, we are reminded at a conscious level there are other people who care about us. So when I go home, my daughter's doing their homework or my wife's at her laptop, I'll go over and I'll rub their back, right? And I'll give them a hug. Not creepy, by the way. Always appropriate. Even at work, there are ways of doing this at work. And I've said this in front of HR specialists, so I've treaded on dangerous territory. But that was almost very bad. You got to be. That was a big ring. That was, yeah. There we go. I mean, like a fist bump at work, even a pat on the shoulder. Yeah. These are simple ways of conveying emotion, of moving other people's emotions and moving your own emotions. And so those are some forms of invisible support.
There's so many tools in this book. The other one that I love is moments of awe that remind us that things are bigger than our problems, like a sunset, a waterfall, big moments that you can't explain. And so it brings me to something that I wanted to talk about with you. You might have noticed there was an election. Pause for laughs, I don't know. So that's a lot of chatter, no matter what side you're on. Republican, Democrat, Independent. And I want you to help us. You got to solve it for us, Ethan. No. Are we all supposed to go to the Grand Canyon and hug each other? Is that what's going to solve it? But that's a joke. But maybe, right? And if this book there's so much about empathy and perspective in this glorious book, what do? We are going to the holidays, and there's a lot of chatter, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of co-rumination, right? Da-da-da-da-da.
Well, we already talked about the co-rumination. We should try to stay away from the co-rumination. A little bit of that can be good, but if you find yourself just spinning with one another, and this often happens a lot, by the way, on social media, in case you haven't heard, right? Getting stuck in these echo chambers that just metastasize, like not productive. So the question is a great question for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think we can maybe help some people here, which is always the goal. But number two, it gives me an opportunity to break a myth that I actually talk about in Shift in the next book. There's this myth that is out there about one-size-fits-all solutions. I am often asked, hey, what is the one thing, or what are the three things we should do to manage our emotional lives? I wish I can tell people what the one or two or three things is that will magically make all of your chatter go away. I cannot. I can't, because what we have learned is that there's remarkable and beautiful diversity in the tools that work for different people dealing with different kinds of situations. We just yesterday, we had a paper accepted that looked at how people managed their anxiety dealing with COVID. Two massive studies. We tracked people for days, several weeks, and we wanted to see, hey, what are the tools? Is there a unique signature that characterizes effective emotion management across people? What we found, no such unique signature exists. The tools that work for one person were remarkably different for the tools that work for someone else. So I say this because this is not to dodge the question, but I have a high degree of certainty that the 3 or 4 things that are going to work for you to manage your election anxiety, if you're experiencing it, are going to be different from the ones that work for me. So for me, it might be distant self-talk. All right, what would I tell to someone else who is really struggling with the outcomes of this election? I'd do that. I'd also do mental time travel in 2 directions. I'd go forward in time. I'd ask myself, how am I going to feel about this 8 years from now? Things will be different one way or another 8 years from now. Even if the Constitutional is amended, things will be different 8 years from now. And so that has a way of broadening my perspective. I'm also going to go back in time, and I talk about this in Shift as well. My grandmother and grandfather survived the Holocaust. So they had their family slaughtered. They lived in the woods of Poland for years, moved from ghetto to concentration camp to another, devastating, like the worst kind of experiences I can contemplate. And I'll often compare my current circumstance, being with you here on this stage and with this remarkable audience, maybe in a political climate that I'm happy about, maybe not, and that doesn't matter. But I'm comparing this experience, this moment, to what life was like for them. That's a powerful way of putting my experiences in perspective. So those would be the first 3 things that I would do. If that doesn't take the edge off, I'm calling up my unbelievable Chatter board of advisors. You know who you are. And I'm getting them to help me work through the problem. And then I'm going for a hike. And I'm trying to inundate myself with awe. So I have different tools that really work well for me. And the invitation I like to extend to everyone is familiarize yourself with the tools that are out there, and then start self-experimenting to figure out the tools that work best for you. One thing I just want to mention, and I'm going to turn it back to you, is you brought up the election, and I think it's important to just let everyone know that chatter, emotion dysregulation, these experiences do not discriminate. They don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. They don't care if you're rich or poor, if you're black or white. These are universal afflictions that we have been dealing with likely for as long as we've been roaming the planet in our present form, i.e. 2 feet, 2 arms. Right? So these are just core challenges that we face as a species. And for the first time in history, I would argue, we have a remarkable set of science-based tools that are non-invasive, relatively side effect free, that can be wielded to help us manage this eternal struggle. And that, I think, is a moment to really savor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, my Lord. I have like 7 more index cards, so we're going to have to talk another time. There's so much more to talk about with chatter. I also love that you said about your 2 kids, your 2 beautiful children, when they're struggling with chatter, you said, just because they're having a verbal thought, that isn't how they have to feel. Our thoughts aren't our destiny.
I love that phrase.
I'm just reading it back.
Who wrote that? I wrote that. Oh my God.
I'll say it again. Our thoughts are not our destiny.
Poetic.
It's so beautiful.
But just a pause right there, because that is such I genuinely do believe that's a powerful message that not everyone registers. It is empowering to know that you have choice of how you are going to allow your thoughts to impact you. People often, so can I take 30 seconds to share something? So, can you control your emotions? People really differ on how they answer that question. And there was this one study I came across several years ago, I talk about it in Shift, that 40% of adolescents, when asked, can you control your emotions, said, no, you cannot. I run a lab. I'm the founder and director of a lab called the Emotion and Self-Control Lab.
Yes.
How is that supposed to make me feel? This is all about, I'm making this all about me now. But I mean, here's why I find that an incredibly disturbing statistic. If you don't think you can control your emotions, are you going to ever take steps to try to do so? Wouldn't make sense.
Right.
So here's the quick answer to this, and it goes back to this quote that you just read. We cannot control the random thoughts and feelings that get triggered throughout the day. Just the other day, I was in the gym. I was carrying a dumbbell. It was an exceptionally large dumbbell, by the way, in case you're wondering. Joking. It was not. I'm carrying a dumbbell from one side of the gym to the next, and there's a lovely woman sitting on lying on a yoga mat doing crunches. And I have a thought, what if I drop this dumbbell on her face? I assure you, I'm not a serial killer up here, right? I have no desire to do this. That was probably my brain telling me, squeeze it tighter because you don't want to get a lawsuit and drop it on her face. But I can't control when that happens. I can't control that automatic reaction I experience when someone cuts me off on the road. What I can control, what we all can control because of this beautiful brain we possess, is how we engage with those thoughts and feelings once we are triggered. That is our playground. That's where there's enormous maneuverability, and that's where that quote really stems from, this recognition that once the thought is triggered, you've got a lot that you could do to push it around.
Yeah. Before we shift briefly, I wanted you to read a passage from the book. It's on 159 of Chatter, your beautiful book, which you can all buy, and you should because it's extraordinary. Will you read that to the audience?
The human mind is one of evolution's greatest creations, not just because it allowed our species to survive and thrive, but because in spite of the inevitable pain that comes with life, it also endowed us with a voice in our head capable of not only celebrating the best times, but also making meaning out of the worst times. It is this voice, not the din of chatter, that we should all listen to.
Yes. Amazing. This book is so accessible, stories, scientific studies, so many more tools. We barely scrape the surface. There's so many tools in here, and it's just incredible. Get it, and then buy as well in February 2025, your beautiful book, Shift, about managing your emotions. It's being called A Revolutionary Guide to Mastering Your Emotional Life. And I wanted you to tell us, first of all, why you wrote it. What is your favorite emotion? And then I want to talk a little bit about why good vibes only is not fun.
Oh boy. Okay, so why did I write Shift? So Chatter was this wonderful experience, and I started doing lots of events like this, virtually, then in person. And I had this reliable experience that would happen after I was done. People would come up to me and say, hey, thank you so much for writing this book. And I often get stuck in these thought loops. I talk to myself using my name. Thank you for telling me I'm not cuckoo. Just joking. And they would say that, and then it would be, but what about envy? And what about when I experience shame? And how about guilt and anger and sadness? And should I always try to be in the moment, or should I try to avoid things? And it was, the feeling I had was, I'd just given a presentation on how to help people manage cardiovascular disease, and they were grateful for it. But they also had questions about inflammation, diabetes, cancer, and you name it. And so it was really an invitation to really open up the books on what we know about our emotional lives. And so the first chapter is actually called Welcome to Your Emotional Life. It's a messy world. And really to try to provide a science-based, story-driven guidebook to navigating that emotional life. So what are emotions? What do they do for us? Why do we have them? When should we try to regulate them? When should we not? And what are the levers? What are the shifters that exist inside us and all around us, in our spaces, in our culture, in our relationships, to skillfully push those emotions around to live the emotional lives that we want to live? And I thought it'd be really easy to write a second book, by the way. I thought one book done, no problem. It was way harder than the first. Way harder.
Yeah, what emotion is that?
Took much longer. Well, So funny, that's a great segue. Emotions don't come in neat little packages. They often bleed into one another. So you can have complex states, right? You ever love and hate someone at the same time?
Yes.
Yeah, what's that about? Right? And so there was frustration and self-actualizing and excitement and guilt, and there's all this cocktail, all the things you see on the movies when you see the writers who are struggling. I live them all.
Yeah. Will you tell us about Good Vibes Only a little bit?
So Good Vibes Only.
Interesting moment.
Yeah. So one of the things I try to do in Shift is bust a lot of the myths that are out there about our emotional lives. And one of the big ones is that we should really strive to live lives that are exclusively filled with happiness, joy, and all these positive states. And, to all of you who are striving to reach that nirvana, my message for you is good luck. Not gonna happen, and it shouldn't happen. And here's why. I am a proponent of the belief, as are many scientists, that all of our emotions are useful, even the negative ones, especially the negative ones, when they are triggered in the right proportions. Not too big, not too long. Take, for example, the current boogeyman emotion of society, anxiety. I think a lot of people hear about anxiety and they like no one wants to be anxious. I told you
You said it helps you. Yeah, it's a driving force.
Anxiety is my friend when it's in the right proportions. I don't like it for too long, but not too high, not too long. Anxiety gets me to perk up. It gets me to prepare for important things. Right? Hey, anxiety is effectively telling me, hey, buddy, listen up. There's something really important coming up, and let's harness. You know that word, harness?
Yeah. I've heard of it.
Harness is acceptable after 8 p.m. Harness all of your resources to focus, to prepare you. I do a lot of public speaking for a living. When I reflect back on what was the worst engagement I ever had, it was an engagement for which I felt nothing before. There was just no anxiety before, no butterflies in my stomach, nothing to motivate me to prepare. So anxiety in the right proportions, really, really helpful. And that is true for all of our negative emotions. There's a utility to them. So the invitation is not to be miserable your whole life. Of course we don't want that. But if you embrace the idea that a little bit of anger in certain contexts or sadness or anxiety is actually useful, that is liberating. It means there's not something wrong with me that I have to fix. This is my mind and body working exactly how it should be working to function optimally. Yeah. And so those are some of the ideas I talk about.
It almost feels like living without seasons. I wouldn't want to live without seasons.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I wish you had mentioned that before I was writing.
Thank you.
So now you're gonna record my audiobook, and we're gonna tell the publisher after this that they need to hold the presses, which they will not do.
They will not. But you all should get this in February, Managing Your Emotions So They Don't Manage You. Shift, Chatter, the voice in our head, why it matters, how we can harness it. I know you told me I can call you Ethan, but I wanted to say thank you, Dr. Kross, for coming here. It's a brilliant, brilliant book, and I'm going to keep doing invisible support to save my marriage. So, yeah. So we're going to do some, yes.
Well, thank you, and thank all of you.
Thank you. So, I get to turn out. We're going to do some questions. So we're going to raise the lights a little bit. Obviously, if you're, not mobile, and we'll come to you. But if you are mobile, you can come to these 2 mic stands at the front, and we can ask questions. Hit it.
Hi. I was really glad to hear you talk about different tools work for different people. Has your lab or you done research around people who we would now call neurodivergent? That's rather prevalent in my family, including a grandchild who's pretty high functioning but has autism. So how are these tools, can they be adapted, worked with, and what's the research around some of this with the neurodivergent folks?
So great question. So some of the tools that I talk about have been studied in those populations and been shown to have some benefits. But it is not the case, unfortunately, that of the close to 30 tools I talk about in Chatter, for example, each one has been systematically studied in those groups. I hope it happens. It has not happened yet. Another thing that we haven't yet done is studied how different combinations of tools work for different populations in different situations. That is the work that is happening right now. It is enormously exciting. It's why I extend the invitation to everyone to self-experiment with some of these tools, because science is really slow, like really slow. That paper that I just told you we published about these different tools that people use to manage COVID, that was 4 years in the making, that paper. So a lot of these tools they're non-invasive. There's very little, if any, side effects. Give them a shot. If they work, keep using them, and if they don't, move on to something else. You're welcome.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about broadening perspective and helping people to broaden their perspective and contrasting with that how to solve their problem. Because I sense that broadening their perspective might be received better than telling them you know best.
That's exactly
correct.
That's exactly right. So once we broaden our perspective, the solutions to our problems can often be found once we do that. So it's a gentle invitation to help people think more constructively. When we experience Chatter, it zooms us in on a problem really narrowly. We think about the issues that are bothering us and how it's making us feel. And it makes good sense why Chatter zooms us in, because what are we taught from the moment we're little kids? When you have a problem, what are you supposed to do? Focus on it, right? Roll up your sleeves, get to the bottom of it. But in fact, what is often helpful in those circumstances is to do the opposite. Step back, look at that bigger picture. Once you do it, different possibilities become accessible that often put us on a different trajectory.
Question in the back. Question in the back.
Dr. Kross, welcome to Traverse City from Michigan Writers. Our whole lives as writers is full of listening to the chatter in our head, creating dialogue, creating characters, putting it all down on paper. And early in the presentation, you made mention of some writing students or writing activities, and I wondered what you tell people about taking it out of their head and putting it on paper. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me up here. This is such a lovely, lovely community and place, and in fact, Laura, if you're listening, we must get a place up here. So it's not that cold. Ann Arbor's worse. It's beautiful. And there are writers everywhere, so I'm home. So expressive writing, I think, is one of the magical findings that in social psychology. And it is exactly what you're describing. And what it involves doing is if you've got a problem, sit down with a paper and pencil and just let yourself go. Just let yourself write. Don't worry about grammar or punctuation for 15 to 20 minutes a day. Do it for 1 to 3 days. And the research shows that often helps people work through their problems really effectively. Why might that be? When we're experiencing chatter, it's almost like there's a pinball machine in our heads. And the thoughts are going in all sorts of directions, and it's non-linear, and we just keep on turning things over. But when you sit down to write, writing imposes a structure on your thinking, because we're taught when you write, you write in these things called sentences and eventually paragraphs, and you shift the story from a beginning to a climax to an end. And that is often what we want with our chatter: an end, a resolution, a conclusion, closure, so we can move on. And so writing is a remarkable tool for doing that. Talking to others too, when it has guardrails, like we talked about, is another way to help people do that.
So I find this all really fascinating, and thank you for coming. As I think about the voice in my head, and maybe many of us do, it kind of happens subconsciously during the day. We're busy, we're multitasking, we're doing a lot of different things, and it's kind of someone else's, or we're subliminally kind of got the tiller behind us, kind of steering us toward the decisions through our inner voice. But magically, as soon as I put my head on the pillow, it explodes, and
This is very strange, by the way. You should get a look at that.
so of course that's when I really start working a problem, and consciously, but at the same time it interferes with my peace and interferes with my restorative sleep. So what's with the paradox? It's just kind of weird.
Yeah, so this is
I'm going through perimenopause, so help me too, man. I'm getting night sweats. Solve all our problems, Ethan.
I will happily share. So this is an incredibly common question. How many people here ever have chatter, trouble going to bed, or wakes you up in the middle of the night? Show of hands. There we go, every single one. Universal, once you get past age 12. The kids, oftentimes they sleep like babies. So, couple of reasons why this happens, and then let me give you my solution, because I get what I call 2 a.m. chatter. I go to bed, so my wife says, with a smile on my face, and then I wake up at 2 a.m. and it's and within 7 seconds, life goes from being beautiful, doing stuff like this, to losing my job, losing my family, homeless, dead. Just boom. And terror, sweats. I'm with you.
Yeah.
So why does this happen? The front part of your brain, your frontal cortex, is often under janitorial services at night. It's being cleaned. It is offline. You don't have access to your frontal cortex in the way you do when you are awake. That is problematic, because those parts of your brain are often recruited to help you work through problems and think about them objectively. So it's like you're going into a firefight and the hose is not fully operational. It's at 25%. That's going to make it difficult to fight that fire, number one. What can you do in that circumstance is a question that many people here grapple with. And there are lots of different solutions that are advocated. Some people say you should switch rooms, read a book, make a nice hot cup of chamomile tea. I can tell you, I'm not doing any of that crap. I'm not getting out of bed. It's cold in Michigan. I don't want to go brew some tea. What I do is I jump into my mental time travel machine and I ask myself a simple question. How are you going to feel about this tomorrow morning? No matter how bad the chatter has ever been at 2 a.m., and it has been some dark shit, okay, at 2 a.m., it is never as bad the next morning when my brain is fully awake and I have my English breakfast tea. I'm able to think about things more constructively. Here's how mental time travel works, and it shouldn't be underestimated as a powerful tool for helping you with your chatter. All of our emotional experiences follow a particular time course. They get triggered, and then as time goes on, they eventually subside. You have lived through this hundreds of thousands, millions of times throughout your life. So you've experienced this. You know this to be true. But at 2 a.m., or when you're experiencing chatter, all you're thinking about is the peak of that experience. The worst case scenario is the worst part. You're losing sight of the fact that as time goes on, things will get better. Jumping into the mental time travel machine, how are you going to feel about this tomorrow, next week, next year, when you're dead? What that does, it highlights the fact that what you're going through is impermanent. It is temporary. And that simple awareness does something very powerful for a mind that is wrapped with chatter. It gives you hope. And for me, that is usually enough to get back to bed. Sometimes Instagram funny reels help too.
That's so beautiful. Question.
Hi, thanks so much for coming. This is a topic that absolutely fascinates me. And you mentioned briefly a history of trauma in your ancestral family. And I'm curious if you can talk about how, if you've done any research or who else is doing research on chatter and trauma, and the way that anxiety often will repress memories, and a lot of severely traumatized people's narrative patterns will go into overdrive until they figure it out. How, if we're telling people, especially people who've experienced complex PTSD or been forced to live in a surface story that's different than the story of the reality, to not engage in chatter, how are they ever going to uncover why they are so traumatized if they have repressed memories?
So thank you for the question. And it gives me the opportunity to clarify a couple of things. So when I use the term chatter, what I'm talking about is a de facto negative experience of getting stuck in a negative thought loop that is destructive. This is not to say that we should not deal with negativity or focus on it. To the contrary, in much of the work that I've done in both of my books, I talk about the value of being able to think about an experience and work through it, reframe it, self-edit your narrative to come up with a more constructive story that helps you work through that experience. And there are lots of ways you could do this, right? There are attentional tools, there are behavioral tools. So I would argue we always want to get rid of the chatter, because the chatter is the bad stuff. And you use the word trauma. Trauma is an extreme manifestation of chatter. It's when the chatter is becoming so loud and it's staying on for so long that it's interfering with your ability to live the life you want to live for a sustained period of time. And we always want to target that. But that doesn't mean we should not confront and work through painful past events. So I would hate for anyone here to leave with that message. So thank you for letting me clarify that.
Last question, Shay Pataja.
You took my name. Dana, no. Hi, my name is Shay. I can't stop thinking. This is a great support group. I think we should do it more often. I'm just curious. I'm in my 40s, and there's a lot of late life ADHD diagnoses happening, myself included. And it was this revelation to me that I was like, but I'm not hyper. I didn't know that it could just manifest in the way that I'm creative. That's what I thought. And I told my family, and they go, yeah, guess that makes sense. Me too. And then we moved on to the next subject. I guess that's what an ADHD family would do. But I'm curious if you think that's real, or how legitimate is that in your profession, because everyone is claiming to be ADHD. We have social media, we have books, like while I'm listening to your book on Spotify, I'm answering text messages and I have my laptop open while I'm finishing a Netflix. It's insanity. So I'm just wondering what you have to say about that and how that fits into this idea of chatter, which seems inherent in ADHD. So that's just my question.
Well, it's a great one. And I think, number one, it's really important to be guided by science. Science isn't perfect. We are constantly learning new things, revising what we know as new data comes in. But I do think it's going to give us the best shot at solving big problems of the sort that we're talking about here tonight. A lot of what you are encountering on social media and in our culture is not science-based. And it is infuriating to me as a scientist that these kinds of messages are proliferating. At best, I think sometimes there's a grain of truth in the stuff. Sometimes it's benign, sometimes it's harmful. That's where having that science-based certification is just so critically important. So, do you have ADHD into your family? Like, I don't know. I'd love to know who told you that and what kind of diagnostic criteria they put you through. And you don't have to answer, and you shouldn't. Right. But
I will for a donation to pay the psychologist. I still have that bill.
But there are. We do have. I'm not a clinical psychologist by training. I work with a lot of them. I collaborate with them. There are diagnostic criteria that are used to make these diagnoses, and they are there for a reason. So think carefully about the information that you are exposed to, because the information you're exposed to shapes the way you think about yourself and the world around you. And that's where, whenever a colleague of mine is pushing real science, I'm always trying to support it because of that.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's interesting. Thank you.
She will be passing around a plate for donations, Shay. Thank you all for being here. Thank you again, Dr. Kross, for being here. It's amazing. Thank you all. Thank you, live audience out there.
Thanks so much.
Live audience here, internet audience. The proceeds from tonight will benefit the National Writers Series Raising Writers program and their reading programs. Be on the lookout, sign up for the newsletter, go on social media. They're going to be announcing the next Battle of the Books, which is coming up. So all of you, take care, put your hand over your heart, say thank you to your inner voice, and remember, none of you killed anybody. So broaden your perspective, and Ethan will be signing books in the lobby. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Up next is Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. Get tickets at nationalwriterseries.org.